Hi, everyone. This is a resource for families who are dealing with explosive conflict during the COVID. And I'm speaking now with Tori Cook from No to Violence. I'm Winifred Lewis, a professor of psychology at the University of Queensland. Tori, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm a senior social work practitioner. I've worked in human services for over 20 years. I have a role at No to Violence as the head of workforce development, and have worked mostly throughout my career with men and women and families related to conflict and family violence.
Thank you. So I'll just go through what we're going to accomplish in this little video. We're going to talk a little bit about, anger and violence and when you really need to get help. And then we'll go through three major areas of avoiding conflict. One is calming yourself down when you're overwhelmed with anger and frustration, avoiding the buildup in the first place, because that's often easier and more fruitful. And then changing the way you think about triggers, those things that make you explode. And in each case, we're going to have a section for how you can manage this if you're the angry person, but also how families can help that angry person, when appropriate. And we'll talk a little bit about strategies that just don't work very well that people commonly use. And then we'll kind of go through before, during, and after one more time. And then there's some resources that we want to share, and we'll go through some acknowledgement slides. And I should say that a write-up of the content of this video as a PDF is available at the website link that you see below you there. So let's just begin with a comment about anger and violence. And we just really need to stress to you as the audience that this is a resource for families because of all the stresses of COVID and being on top of each other. We know there's a lot more conflict than usual. But for some people, this is really part of an ongoing problem of, conflict in the home. And if you are experiencing being frightened or hurt regularly at home, you really might find this video helpful, but you also might benefit from professional help. And it is important, if you're scared, if you're frightened in your home, if you're hurt in your home, that you reach out. And there's many resources in this video at the end, but also online. Anger is very common and normal, but violence is a choice, and that everyone has to take responsibility not to be violent. And if you're exposed to violence or your children are, you can get help and you don't have to do it alone. So we've got some resources at the end, but 1800 Respect is one great resource, and anyone can Google help family conflict or help family violence. And sort of related to this point is that although we're talking about explosions here and shouting, lashing out, there's another pattern of anger which can also be very damaging to families, of sarcasm and controllingness and coercion day to day. And you can learn a lot more about that at the resource of No to Violence, ntv.org.au. And you can learn about how that could be affecting your family and how to get help. Tori, do you want to comment anything more on this slide?
I think you've covered everything. There's so much help out there.
Yeah.
And also for men particularly who are using family violence, there's the Men's Referral Service.
Yeah. And that number's at the end. Yeah,
Sure.
We've listed that at the end. Okay, well, great. Let's just get stuck into it. So this first slide is really about how people can use evidence-based strategies that actually do work to calm down when you're feeling overwhelmed, angry, frustrated. So Tori, do you want to take us through some of these strategies?
Sure. I think one of the first things I wanted to talk about when we think about what goes on in the body when we begin to escalate or start to feel agitated. There's a lot that goes on in the body when those feelings start to get overwhelming, and there's a number of different strategies that are quite successful. The first thing is about noticing that there's changes in the body, and that there's different things that you can do to assist yourself to manage that agitation. And the first thing is to really notice what's going on in your body. Really notice that your breathing might be quite shallow, that your muscles might be really tense, that your thinking might be, there might be lots of different thoughts happening over and over again.
Yeah.
So what I often talk about with people is, that first take a breath. Take a deep, deep breath, because that really assists with the shallow breathing. And so, it's almost like 4 counts in and then breathing out 4 counts out. So really start to slow down that breathing. And that kind of leads into that counting, like as you're breathing and you're counting, you're also distracting from some of those thoughts. There's also some work that's been done around, putting your hand on your heart and just and really connecting to your values around, being not wanting to explode, like actually go back to a form that those ways of communicating that remember your values of respect, and the values of related to love and loving your family,
And one of the advantages of that hands-on heart strategy is it's actually simple. Like sometimes people can be so angry that they actually can't control their breathing or count. So putting your hands on your heart is something that people can use, in emergency rooms, for example, when patients are just overwhelmed with distress. Just put your hands on your heart and wait until you're calmer. It actually, eventually, it's going to happen, and it's helpful. As Corey's saying, you're remembering your values there.
Yeah, and connecting to your body, and actually, you're probably noticing your heartbeat as well. So there's a whole lot of that can be an incredibly helpful way to to get back into the room and get back into that respectful. Just noticing the disrespectful tone and noticing disrespectful language, and actually starting to think about, actually, hang on, I've got to calm myself here, and that leads into taking a break. And actually saying to your partner, I need a break, I'm just going to go for a walk around the block, and I'm just going to breathe. And that's a really safe way of addressing that sense of not being in control. The other thing is that distraction, finding an activity, but I really want to stress that it's important to talk to your partner about, this is what I'm going to do because I need to calm down. I need to, let's go back to this, back to this. I'm not ignoring you. I'm not withdrawing. I'm just needing to do something just to calm myself down.
And it could be as simple as saying, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to take a walk around the block, or I can't deal with this tonight. I'm exhausted, but tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., let's get to it after breakfast. We can talk then. And that's really helpful. I mean, I guess part of the distraction is sometimes people will take a break, but they spend the whole break or the whole walk thinking angry thoughts. And what you want to do is really try and calm yourself. Look at a picture on your phone, play a video game that's immersive, not action-based or violent, but, a puzzle or something you really enjoy. And then you're really feeling that calmness and you're ready to engage with your family again.
There's very few things that require an immediate resolution or an immediate answer. I often say to people, give it the time that it needs. Like, you don't have to find a solution now. Think about, am I going into I'm rightness? Do I need to be right? Or do I need to think that maybe there's 3 or 4 other ways of looking at this? I'm really kind of stuck on my way of looking at this. And we call it thought stacking, when you have one thought and then you have another thought, and that can lead to sort of some intoxicated thinking. That can lead you to be more escalated, and more like just not giving yourself permission to have 1 or 2 more different ways of thinking about the same situation.
And that's where calling a friend can be really helpful too, right? Because then they can give you perspective, and a good friend, I'm sure a friend, can give you that advice. It sounds like actually it's not that big of a deal. I can understand why you're annoyed. Anyone would be annoyed, but actually maybe it's not worth all the drama, and maybe there's other tensions that are contributing. I think the try again point is really linked to the idea that, some people just get into this mindset that they can't change, that they're just the kind of person that always lashes out. That's just who they are. They've got a bad temper. But oftentimes that does come from your family of origin and maybe your life experiences, but people can change. These are real skills. And when you practice them, you get better. It's like everything else. When you first start, you're not as good. You breathe for like, in for 4, out for 6, and then you get angry and start shouting again. But if you do it 10 times, you're going to calm down, so practice, practice, practice. And a lot of these skills, they may not feel natural, but you will get better at them. And it's very valuable over time.
Yeah. And I often notice that people, sometimes people get really tired of the same thing over and over again. And like I know that I need to do something different here. And so, it is about practicing, and it's about learning something new. And we know that it doesn't matter how old we are, we're incredibly capable of learning new ways of communicating. That's
right. I mean, I don't know. The other day we were talking about, how old is the oldest person that you've helped? That has changed the way they related to their family. And maybe I'll just put that question to you, Tori. How's the oldest person that you've helped?
Probably somebody in their 70s, and who were absolutely thrilled to, because they just got sick of themselves. They'd gotten this. I'm like, I've been doing it like this for decades, and I'm really kind of over it. And the first thing was to say, well, what makes you think you can't do something different? It's like anything, if you let's take you back to when you first learned how to drive a car, or when you first learned how to, and I think what I did was I said to him, so, have you learned how to put apps in your phone? Oh yeah, I can do that. It's like, well, isn't that learning?
Exactly.
Didn't you get a little bit frustrated at the beginning? And so we walked that through, and what was really lovely was, was just watching his confidence around, yes, I can do this, actually. And I think that's the thing to remember, that narrative that we tell ourselves about what we can and can't do, and actually there's a lot that we can, and that we actually do change every day. The fact that our entire society has changed behaviour to address the safety around COVID is an indication that we can all adjust for the greater good, and that's and that we can do that in our homes.
Yeah, and that last point is about how we cope in our homes. I mean, a lot of people might not know that Australian guidelines for alcohol right now suggest you should drink no more than 4 drinks at a time, and no more than 10 in a whole week. So you'll find that the way that you manage your alcohol will affect the conflict in your family, and in particular, alcohol is actually one of the strongest predictors of not only having conflict, but having conflict that goes badly with hurtful words and even worse. So limiting your alcohol is a really important choice that you can make when you're angry.
Yes. Yep. Alcohol, alcohol exacerbates, and it can also give internal permission. It's a de-inhibitor. It gives internal permission for justification, and that can be really regretful for people. In the next day or a few days later, there's that sense of, oh, hang on a minute, I probably shouldn't have had all that beer, or I shouldn't have had all of those wines, and there can be a lot of regret later.
Yeah, I mean, you spend a lot of money so that you feel good for a little while, but then you've got the lasting consequences with your family. And Now we're on to a section where how family members and others can help the angry person when the angry person is overwhelmed. What can you do? I just want to say again here that it's not your responsibility to manage someone else's emotions or behaviors. They have to take responsibility for themselves. But there can be dynamics that families get into that are more negative or more helpful. So the kinds of helpful things that you can do when you've got a child or a partner that's really getting overwhelmed is firstly to remember those same tools for yourself, because usually it's not just one angry person. There's 2 angry people in the room, and you can avoid escalation when you are doing some breathing, when you are counting, and when you take a break when you need to. But there's some other things that are important. I mean, one of them, Tori, is that people shouldn't chase after someone who's trying to take a break. And do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, look, I think the thing to remember in conflict is that when people are agitated, there won't be that doesn't create the space for a resolution.
Yeah.
It doesn't navigate the ability to negotiate where everybody feels safe,
Mm.
because there's so much emotion. There's so much
Yeah.
emotion that's happening all in that moment. So what happens is that people begin to try to manage that emotion by getting to a resolution when everybody's agitated. So I think for me, the chasing can be think about whether or not am I chasing this person because I want them to resolve this now.
Yeah.
And is that the best way to do this?
Yeah.
And it might very
Exactly.
well be that that you just need to just take that breath, do that breathing, notice what's going on in your own body, and know that when things have calmed down, that's a better time for a good solution to be navigated
That's right. I mean, you can
in a
take that
safer way.
space now. That's right. And then imagine, talk later. We might all want the conflict to be over now and to be addressed now, but the reality is that sometimes when we keep pushing, it just escalates and it doesn't actually get to a resolution. So that's
Yeah.
why take the space now, talk later. And in the meantime, what should you do? I mean, I think a fruitful thing is to turn your attention away from the issue or the angry person towards yourself and the rest of your family, and think, how can we have self-care now? What can we do to feel calmer, to do something different that's useful and productive? Turn your attention to yourself and your family, and take some self-care.
And if I can just add to that,
Yeah,
that's not dealing with the problem.
exactly.
That's just dealing with the emotion and
Mhm.
the overwhelming emotions that both people are experiencing in that moment. So I think sometimes people believe that if they don't keep trying to address the problem or keep talking about it, or they use passive aggressive techniques or statements, what happens is they feel like they're not winning,
Yeah,
and or they feel like this is never going to be resolved, and that's part of the feeling of being overwhelmed. So I
yeah,
think it's about like almost standing outside of yourself and watching your own emotion and saying, actually, nothing is going to get resolved when we're feeling like this. So what I need to now do is just model being calm and and giving it the time for the agitation to reduce, so that we can come back to this when things feel a lot calmer. And remember the times when you and your partner have navigated and negotiated things calmly, and trust that that will happen again.
that's right. And just coming back to that point that you can feel disrespected and rejected when someone's walking away. And over time, you have to build up that trust as a couple. But there can definitely be a dynamic at first where people walk away and don't come back and don't address it. But that's a separate problem, right? The part where
Yeah.
they're taking a break to deal with their overwhelm is good. The part where they might not want to come back and talk about it later is a separate problem. So don't make them the same. Let them take that space and calm down and then address it later.
Yeah.
So one important point to realize with your family conflict is that although it's really good to calm down when you're overwhelmed, or to help someone calm down when they're overwhelmed, it's even better if you can avoid that explosive moment of overwhelm. And there is, in fact, usually a long period, but sometimes a short period, where the tension's building up and people are becoming more alert, more agitated. And sometimes you can deal with that proactively. And part of it is really about understanding the background stress, not just for you, but for everyone in the family. And as Tori was highlighting, we are dealing with an extraordinary situation with the COVID right now. People are on top of each other. People maybe are having financial stress. The job that you enjoyed, you may not be able to do it, or perhaps you're trying to do it from home while you've got your children with you. You're struggling even to have basic things like toilet paper, which in Australia and elsewhere in the developed world is really unusual, right? You're having fear in some cases of hunger, which is extraordinary, not since the Great Depression have we seen these kinds of stresses. But also some of the things that you used to do to cope with your stress have now been taken away. So you might have had the habit of going to the beach or bushwalking or hiking in the forest. Those aren't options anymore. And you might have had habits of socializing with your friends and having that positive contact, and that's also been threatened. So having a clear understanding of how stressful it is for you is really important in understanding how to manage your tension. But the same is true for your children and your partner. So with children, they don't like changes in routine. They are bored and annoyed just like you. They want to see their friends. They're understimulated. So we're really seeing a dynamic where everyone in the family is potentially not operating at their peak, to be mindful of. Psychologists talk about problem-focused and emotion-focused coping. There may be some problems that you can solve as a family. So, for example, you can brainstorm some routines and habits so for yourself. You might even put up a sheet somewhere so that there's a little nook where children can go to have a bit of privacy, or maybe make a cubby, they can go under the table so that they can get away from the tension in the adults. And so perhaps adults can also hide there to get away from the children. And, you can brainstorm some of these solutions, but the reality is when we look at the big picture now, a lot of these problems cannot be fixed. They're not in our family control. The world pandemic, your financial stresses, if you've got them, worry about your family, the other people in your family, like the grandparents, you may not be able to address these. So we have to turn from problem-focused coping to emotion-focused coping. Now, just because everything's going to hell in a handbasket does not mean that we all have to lash out and have explosive conflict with our family. It does make it more likely, but we can try and use our skills to prevent that. So really what we're talking about is understanding what are the things that make you and your family feel happier and calmer. And we have to grow our toolkit because some of the things that we used to do are no longer available. So brainstorming as a family, or maybe just the adults, but getting everyone involved is often helpful. What do you enjoy doing? What can we bring in? So every day there's some time for dad to just go into the garage and have privacy, or go out to the shed. Every day there's time for mom, there's time for the kids. Everyone has, the opportunity to relax and to feel good, and really making that part of your prevention of conflict, to do things that are positive. Tori, did you want to comment about that, or?
Oh, just to add that, what a great opportunity to see resilience, and to notice resilience in each member of the family. I think one of the things that I find interesting is when people, I think what can be really helpful is to notice that, what you used to do every day isn't possible. And actually noticing that and going, okay, so what kind of adjustments do I need to make now, and what strengths do I have, and what strengths does everybody in the family have that can really brainstorm, as you say, so to move into that kind of growing that toolkit, because every single person in the family has a lot of gifts and skills to problem solve, to try something new, but also to reflect back and think about, there's been other times when as a family we've had to deal with some tough stuff. How did we do that? Let's draw from that.
That's right. I mean, I think for a lot of people, they feel far from high functioning, the feeling of like, oh, wow, we're such bad parents and our children are so feral. How did this happen? But it's about being gentle with yourself, understanding that big picture, and also just coming back to the idea that you can try again and you can reset, you can reboot. And so just dealing with this last line here, we talked about already knowing the warning signs when you're in an explosion, but even before then, there may be some warning signs that you're noticing. Irritability, fatigue, trouble sleeping, these are all things that highlight the buildup of stress in your family. And with the children, there can be some clinginess and some whining. These are signs of their stress, not just that they are actually upset, but that they're upset about other things that maybe they're not expressing. Avoiding what doesn't work, which we'll talk about more later. And here again, just really watching the role of alcohol for the adults and teenagers and so on, because it is a toxic contributor to family tension in the long run. Let's just move on, because we've already started to talk about it, of how others can help someone who's becoming more tense. And again, just to reiterate, you don't have to take responsibility for other people, but you can do things that are helpful or less helpful. One thing that's often very helpful is for someone to name out loud all the stresses, and just especially for children, it really helps them to process and understand what's going on. So just to say, this is a scary time, isn't it? I mean, how are you feeling? Or, do you feel sad? Do you feel angry? What are you feeling right now? and helping them then to listen and reflect back what they're saying so that you can name out loud what's going on and help someone to recognize the pressures that they've been under, or to help someone recognize the pressures that someone else is under. Like to say to the parent, it's interesting, you know, how you were seeing that our child is a lot clingier, our child is upset right now, our child is missing her friends or his friends. And then celebrating those strengths, like Tori said, is just so important. You know, you can end up in a cycle where all you do is talk about what went wrong yesterday. But there are some things that went right. We can celebrate that, and there's some strengths. You can brainstorm first practical solutions, like you can ask someone to set aside, you know, because we often don't have enough space in our family homes for having all of us there all the time. That's not what they're designed for. So can we create a rule where this corner, we rotate in and out of it, especially if we have introverts in the family, that everyone has some alone time. You know, that's the place where you can go. And you can also help someone to recognize that, you know, some things just cannot be changed, but we can't get there too quickly. We've got to first listen and help someone to express the stresses and frustrations that they have. And then after that, you can say, yeah, it's terrible. We can't do much about that, but what can we do to feel better? What can we do to plan ahead? Sometimes people will be frustrated, especially with children, because, you know, they're disrupting your work or whatever. Can you plan ahead and create those structures and routines? And just touching on the question of schooling that so many parents are exasperated with, is really trying to understand that this is a process of establishing structure and routines and being gentle with yourself. We'll come back to this point, but you're not a primary school teacher and you won't be as cool as your primary school teacher, but you can help your children to develop structure and routines and ways to relax. Sorry, Tori, I just spoke without stopping for ages, but do you want to comment on this slide too?
I think just to add to your wonderful advice, and that would be two words come to mind for me: kindness.
Yeah.
And the value of kindness. And the other word is expectation, you know, like how it might just be that in the moment when a child is really frustrated or a teenager is really frustrated, that a great question to ask yourself is, what are my expectations here? And what do I need to change? And maybe that might reduce some of this tension, because if I've got an expectation that they do a full 7 hours of schoolwork, then maybe I need to really think that through. I need to think, oh, actually maybe 2 hours is more than enough. I don't have to be the same as a teacher. So I think expectation management can be a really helpful way to see this as well. What are my expectations and what can I drop?
That's right. And I think that leads really well into the next section on changing how you think about triggers. Because a lot of people have an intuition that their actions are almost, you know, uncontrollable. So, you know, the child was screaming or my partner was playing loud music, I just exploded. And it isn't actually like that if you think about it. You don't have to do the same thing every time. And in fact, you don't do the same thing every time. It might have been 4 previous occasions when they were playing loud music when nothing bad happened. And then this time it was different. So we can do that in reverse. We can think, how can we rewire our buttons so we don't have these explosive moments? How can we change how we think about triggers? One thought exercise that's really useful for a lot of people is to think, well, if your boss or your mother or the prime minister were in your living room, you wouldn't be reacting to the stress in the same way. So you can change how you react. And how would you do that? You know, what would be the process that you controlled yourself? And there's this idea of talking sense to yourself. You know, how would you calm yourself down? Usually it's by replacing some of these unhelpful thoughts that you have, like they always do this, they're driving me crazy, they're doing it on purpose, they disrespect me, they don't like me, they don't care about my pressure that I'm under. Replacing those negative thoughts with some helpful thoughts, like maybe they're pressured, maybe they need a snack, maybe they need to sleep, you know, maybe this isn't a big deal. You know, sometimes people will talk about the 20-year rule. Is this something that's going to matter in 20 years? If not, it's not a good choice for an explosive moment, you know, because they might remember how you screamed at them for a longer time than you remember what annoyed you in the first place. So we've got to try and make sure that we don't disproportionately react. How would a neutral observer view the situation? How would someone look at it in terms of, unemotional language. Like sometimes there's these ideas that, you know, if you just describe what's going on as if you were a third person watching it, you know, my child is repetitively hitting the wall with a plastic toy and they won't stop even though I've just told them and I'm getting a headache. You know, then you're able to intervene at the behavioral level, like replacing the plastic toy with a plush toy, or getting some painkillers for your headache, or leaving the room so you can't hear, problem solved. I'm just kidding there. I know it's not as easy, but the idea is when you focus on the emotions, sometimes that can really cycle. When you focus on the behaviors, that can be a better way to change. What are your thoughts on this issue of thinking differently about triggers, Tori?
I think one of that's why I talk about thought stacking. You know, notice your thoughts. Because one thought can lead to another thought, leads to another thought, and then you get into some territory where you notice yourself making very general statements, as you said, you know, oh, you're always like this, or why do you never listen to me? You know, we make these broad, big statements, and but actually we need to really question that and to say, oh, actually that's not true. Right now, this is how I'm feeling, and what are my thoughts telling me? Are my thoughts helping me, or are they do I need to really, you know, do I need to slow this down? And there are definitely some ways to slow down some of that thought stacking, you know, that, or firstly, notice it. You know, notice that I'm having this, that like my child never listens to me. They're doing this because they know that it annoys me. And I'm just going to lose it. And then I'm going to start yelling at them. And they know that I get like this. And so you've got yourself into a bit of a spiral. So notice the spiral and where you can actually interrupt the spiral. And you can usually interrupt that spiral well before it gets to the point of making broad statements about the other person or the child.
That's right. And that's where another person can also be helpful. Although, again, highlighting, as we've been saying all along, you don't have to take responsibility, but you can sometimes help. And one of them is by helping to identify and reframe the triggers. Now, this is hard to do in the heat of the moment, right? If they're in the middle of the explosion, that's not the time for this kind of conversation. That's where you're doing things like advising them to breathe or saying, do you need to take a break, or so on. But when they calm down afterwards, to have that family conversation and say, I can see that you kids get really frustrated when dad won't talk to you for hours because he's working, or mom's trying to talk, you know, work and won't talk to you for hours. You know, have those conversations and then help them to understand the trigger differently. And sometimes it's issues of feeling rejected or feeling disrespected that can be addressed. Helping people as well to see the positive in each other, you know, can be helpful. And that's part of the expectation management that Tori's really been talking about. You know, like, what do we think our 5-year-old's going to be like all day long? Do you think that at school they're little angels that never lash out or scream? So, you know, that we should be happy our child has only had one meltdown today. That's an improvement. Yesterday they had 5. So, you know, helping understand brings compassion. And then, of course, the issue that sometimes your family might just need more help. And now is a great time to look for that help in a way, because with COVID, we've seen those changes where you can access telehealth through your GP to get a referral, or go online, get referrals so that you can get help for your family if the conflicts just won't change. If you have these conversations and they're not getting anywhere, one thing to do is just remember everyone needs to be calm. So restart the conversation when you're calm. But if you're having conversations when you're calm and the angry person, you know, really lacks insight and doesn't take responsibility and won't start working towards change, that can mean that your family would benefit from professional help, and it is available, right, Tori?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's about noticing those patterns.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you notice those patterns, and the fact that those patterns are getting worse, though that's the time to go online and to seek information. And there's so many helplines there that can really assist to people to understand what is this pattern. Is this pattern conflict? Is this pattern family violence? Is this pattern resolvable? And do we need extra help, you know, to help us?
And you can get help for any level of crisis, just like you can get help for any level of physical crisis. So you don't have to wait. You know, you might think, oh, we're not having any violence, so we can't get help. But no, there's heaps of people that can help for issues of family conflict. And sometimes it's really just a few sessions that you need to break through a deadlock, and get everyone onto the same page as a family about how we're going to move forward from now.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, so I might just ask for a little wrap up here.
Sure.
And, just thinking about this arc, I guess one of the points we really want to make is that people can feel self-compassion and feel, I think, a sense of, I would say, hope that if you practice these skills, it will benefit your family, not just now during the COVID, but even after it's over, right? These are valuable skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I just want to draw people's attention back to noticing the importance of noticing what's going on in your body. What's that first sign in me when I'm feeling agitated? That skill alone will lead you to the next set of skills that we've talked about today. And the noticing part is where that's the start of change.
Yeah, that's a great way to end. Well, we wish everyone well, and thank you for listening to us.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time.
So I'm just going to go through now some of the conflict strategies that people might commonly use that actually make things worse. And then I'm going to talk about sort of before, during, and after the conflict, and then we'll go through our resources and acknowledgements. So one strategy that actually makes things worse, this might surprise you, is avoiding all conflict. So there's definitely a role for letting some things go, like the towel on the floor or dirty dishes, when people are under a lot of pressure to try and minimize conflict for the family. But over time, if your family's never able to communicate or you're never able to talk to your partner, that is associated with relationship breakdown and with the likelihood of explosions. So what you want to do is get to a point where when you're calm, you're able to talk to people about the things that are bothering you and brainstorm different ways of thinking about the trigger, but also ways that you can be made to feel calmer, you can be helped to feel calmer, and ways that you can put yourself in a situation where you're just not exposed to that trigger if possible. So all of these are important. There's another strategy that's almost the opposite of that. That's rumination, what psychologists call it. That's when dark thoughts go around your head and you've kind of left the conflict. You're not actually fighting, but you're still thinking negatively about your partner or your children for hours at a time or minutes at a time. So something that you can do to distract yourself and take a break could be just, taking a bath, relaxing, doing something you enjoy. And there's another strategy that's a bit less intuitive where you just put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and that will actually interrupt the self-talk. So it gives you the opportunity to then distract yourself and do something more positive and productive. It also used to be the case that people would say, look, when you're angry, just go out, let it all out, some shadow boxing, punching a pillow. That's actually not recommended anymore because the evidence has shown that when you're rehearsing hitting someone or letting it all out in an aggressive way, that can be associated with explosive conflict and even sometimes with actual violence. So people don't recommend that punching a pillow anymore. You want to do something that calms yourself down, not something that's going to rev yourself up. Drugs and alcohol are not good ways of dealing with your emotions, as we've already talked about. They're associated with more conflict and the risk of violence. And it may seem like an obvious point to most viewers, but even if your child bites you or hits you or your partner hits you, you're not allowed to hit them back. It's actually against the law, and it can lead to grave consequences and relationship breakdown. Something that you might not have thought about is that even scaring someone is actually very bad for your children or your partner. So intimidating people, smashing things on the floor, and making threats of violence is actually also something that can bring you into contact with the law. So although you may feel like you're overwhelmed and you've got to let it out, it's important to choose a strategy like leaving the room and distracting yourself that keeps your family safe and, again, allows you to be the kind of person that you want to be. So just to recoup, before a conflict is actually where you can do a lot of the heavy lifting for your family to keep safe. Firstly, when you're exposed to annoyances and hassles, give people the benefit of the doubt, give them a break, ask yourself how important it is. Now, again, this is more when you have a healthy family that's going well, and not when you're in an abusive relationship or exposed to things that are making you frightened, or you're being physically hurt in your home, being controlled. So you may need to get help, but if you're not in that range, then think about how you can reduce conflict by perspective taking and getting a sense of, is this really important to you? Staying in touch with your body is so important, as Tori was saying, because when you notice you're getting tense, you can take the steps to relax before you explode. When you're at 4 out of 10 instead of 9 out of 10, it's going to be easier to prevent that explosion. And talking with your family about things that are going on, trying to create especially some private space if that's possible, even if it means hanging up a sheet or a curtain, make a little nook that people can go to, or allowing people to just be in the bedroom for 15 minutes to calm down. And thinking of a way to signal, whether that's verbally, where you're able to say to your family, okay, I'm starting to get really grumpy. Can everyone just let me calm down for 15 minutes? Or, something nonverbal, like, waving your hands in the air in a non-menacing way and just saying, okay, I need to stop now. Now, the important point there is that you're signaling that you're overwhelmed as you take responsibility to calm down. So they can try and manage to give you that space, but you take responsibility with the space to calm yourself down. During a conflict, as we talked about, you try and reduce your overwhelm by managing your emotions with breathing, with counting, taking a break, distraction, talking to friends, so on. And importantly, if you're scaring other people or things are really escalating, you be the one to leave and take responsibility so that no one's being frightened or physically hurt, especially. And afterwards, there's just such a positive role for reflection and thinking, that wasn't in line with my values, and I'm going to try and do it differently next time. In addition to that internal self-talk, though, it's really good to try and have some external talk, and this is quite hard to do, but you can practice, where you apologize, not for everything, but for the things that were your part in it. So other people might have done things wrong, okay, but you also apologize. I'm sorry for my part in it. I'm sorry for what I did wrong, and I'm going to try and do it differently next time. And taking responsibility for the behavior and for repairing the damage and working is going to be something that's going to help your family to regain the trust after an episode of conflict. I want to now highlight some Australian resources. Anywhere in the world, you can Google help family violence or help family conflict and get some help. But in Australia, we've got some great resources, especially Men's Referral Service and DV Connect, for example. And I'll leave that up there for a few seconds, but you're able to replay, obviously. And in addition, just restating that if you need professional help for your family, don't be afraid to get it. There's a lot of help out there, and it really can be a benefit. It can really be valuable for you and for the people around you. People can change late in life, and maybe the COVID is reminding you that you want to work on yourself, and it's good to get help when you do that. This resource was developed by a team that is far bigger than just Tori and I. So you see the names on the screen there. I want to acknowledge all of them and the people that gave us feedback. We also want to highlight, we really welcome your feedback on whether this was useful to you. If you've got any questions or comments, please do send us an email, w.lewis@psy.uq.edu.au. And I'll just note again that the content of this video is available as a PDF online at the link that you see here, and you're able to access other resources there as well. Thanks for listening, and we hope this is useful to you.